obviously over this weekend, there were shootings that happened. There was the big shooting, Highland Park shooting that occurred, which is getting a lot of attention. And then when you look at the number of how many people were also shot in the city of Chicago, Clay, it is mind-blowing. We thought there'd be a lot of shootings over the weekend just because historically there tend to be. This is Chicago City, not including the mass shooting that occurred in Highland Park, which is, I think, is it north, a little bit north of Chicago? I don't know the Chicago area that well. In the city itself, Clay, over the 4th of July weekend, 71 people were shot, 8 were killed. 71 people.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember
crazy.
when I was looking at what was going on in the war zones for the CIA, if we had a weekend where we took 71 military casualties,
would have been unheard of.
People would have said, oh, my gosh, it would have been a
Yes.
major battle. We would have been in the middle of the Battle of Fallujah or something. I mean, that's a lot of people to get shot over a weekend. And we just had a quote bipartisan. A number of senators went along with this. And what did we say? It's not going to stop shootings. And it's not even going to stop Democrats from demanding that we do more the next time. It's never like, okay, we've gotten the laws right. We now just have to enforce them better.
Their goal is to end the Second Amendment.
Totally.
That's their goal.
That's it. And we know this. So that's why when, we get the moral lectures and the virtue signaling from the Mitt Romneys, and Lindsey Graham went along with it. I hope people remember who went along with this. Not only are we now hearing more calls for gun control, the gun control package that just passed would have done effectively nothing to stop this mass shooting, and clearly didn't stop the 71 shootings or 71 people from being shot and 8 killed in Chicago over the weekend.
Well, and it's symptomatic of the overall violence in which this country is descending into. And, Buck, I'm afraid, and I bet you also have this same fear, that, to your point, the shootings overwhelmingly increase in the summer. There are a lot of reasons for that. It's hot. People are out of their houses. Kids are out of school. There's a lot more free time, and free time for idle hands often creates more issues in many of these cities. We've had a lot of police officers retiring. Many of these police officer corps are not strongly staffed right now, so there's fewer officers on the street. We continue to arrest and return all of these vigilantes who were being arrested constantly for violent acts that are being permitted to go back out in the streets. And, Buck, I try not to name ever the shooters in any of these mass shooting events, because I do think that's the one thing that people who are like us, media, can do to help. But I have to say, every time one of these guys shoots, you look at their social media profile and you can watch 1 2-minute video and say, this guy, and they're almost always guys, is mentally unstable. And I can't impress upon you how often this occurs, where you watch the video, and even if this kid wasn't going to be a mass shooter, you're like, this kid is seriously mentally out of touch, and something bad is going to happen. And I watch that guy's videos, and I feel the same way.
Clay, you look at the shooter, and by the way, I agree with your general position. No, there's no need to name him. It doesn't. His name doesn't matter in any good way.
A lot of these guys are trying to get famous. That's why they're shooting.
Right.
So we try not to. But I mean, obviously, if there's a situation where there's somebody, we're on air, and there's a mass shooter who's loose on the city,
that's
and
right.
like we need
there
to describe
are times
him, we'll do
it's not
it.
a hard and fast rule.
There are some exceptions, but yes.
But so you look at this individual, the photos of him, and I mean this, and I'm not trying to be judgmental in a way that goes beyond this instance, but you say, well, that guy's crazy.
Yes.
I mean, you look at him, he's got blue hair, tattoos all over his face, and you just look into his eyes, and I mean this. There's something about the eyes of these shooters. The kid's a psychopath, all right?
Yes.
He's 22 years old. He's a psychopath. And so now we're going to have a real conversation. He bought it legally. He's 22. So none of the discussions in recent weeks about how we're going to stop, unless the position of the left is, the Second Amendment only covers muskets. We're going to take all your guns, which some of them, you see this all over social media. They will say that It's crazy.
Which I respect, because at least they're being honest about
well,
what
at least
their
that's
goal
the truth.
is.
Yes, but I mean, it's crazy in terms of
Yes.
a policy because it's never going to happen, and I think it would lead to. I think government confiscation of all firearms would lead to a very, very, very bad state of affairs in the country. Just putting it mildly. But so none of the things they've talked about would have changed the situation with this individual, except the mental health angle. Well, now let's look at this. You and I, and anyone listening, could have looked at a photo of this kid, and certainly if you sit down and chatted with him and spoke to him a little bit, and law enforcement was aware of him.
Just watch his videos that he was posting on social media. He's clearly unwell.
So what can we do about this? And I ask this because I don't have an answer, but if we want to have a discussion to stop this, I believe this is the pathway you go down. Are we willing to take someone like this who has, until this instance, until this mass murder, I don't believe had he broken the law? Was there any criminal record?
Not that I've seen.
I haven't seen any criminal record. He had done nothing criminal before this. Are we willing to say this guy is a psychopath? We're going to lock him up for being a psycho under a mental health issue.
Yep.
And by the way, how long do we hold him? Is this a life sentence for being a psychopath? And I'm not asking this rhetorically. I really don't know. But that's what we're dealing with. This is someone who was deranged. And there's 7 billion people plus in the world, and they're going to be evil, deranged maniacs. So what do we do?
I think it's a fabulous discussion that an adult country would have. I also think a part of this discussion, and I know there are some exceptions, is why did the mass shooter phenomenon basically start to a large extent? Now, I know you had the shooting from the tower in Texas and University of Texas, and there are exceptions out there.
Yeah, there was the
right?
Scottish school massacre in the 90s, and there have been shootings stretching back for a long time.
But by and large, this is something that seems to have started around the time of Columbine, right? Early 90s, where people just started to take weapons. We had widely available weapons in the United States for hundreds of years. Buck, you know guns way better than I do, but we've had high capacity. We've had the ability to do this in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It didn't happen by and large. Why did and why have mass shootings? And again, I want to point out, too, to the data that you shared, 71 people got shot in Chicago. Most of those were not mass shootings. Mass shootings are a small part of the overall acts of violence.
It was gang and criminal violence in Chicago, which is 99% of, or 95% of the murders that are occurring in Chicago on a regular basis.
But the way that we cover these, by and large, is a mass shooting because of the fear factor, right? Because anybody can think, hey, I'm at a July 4th parade. What if somebody brings out a gun? We saw a shooting in Philadelphia. We saw the shooting in the Chicago area. Why have the mass shootings? Despite the fact that guns were extremely prevalent, like I said, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, why have they started in the 90s and spread? And I'm not claiming to know the answer. I would love to hear from people out there. You can tweet us. You can call in. 800-282-2882. Do you have, I'm sure it's many things, do you have a thesis, Buck, on why in the 90s, after 200 years basically of limited mass shootings, why did this happen?
The problem with this, and maybe it'd be good to have on, the guy that I know who has the data cold, knows the numbers, would be John Lott. So maybe we invite John on to talk about this, because when we talk about mass shootings, there's also a lot of ways they expand the numbers, right? They'll say it's 2 or more people shot.
Right.
Well, if there's a gang dispute on the corner and the guy fires off a bunch of rounds, that's a mass shooting, but it's not a mass shooting in the context of a mass murder by psychopath that you and I are talking about.
It's also targeted, like in a fight.
Totally
like
different.
You can see that shooting as opposed to just at a, yeah, exactly.
Right. Still murder, but it's a different circumstance, a different situation. We're talking about these random acts of mass murder shootings. They're statistically still, and
very
anytime
rare.
this happens, everyone says, "Oh, how could you say this?" It is a fact. They are statistically very rare. I think that a big part of it is our perception is driven by the access that we all have to constant news and information sources to believe that they are considerably more common than they actually are statistically. And you're right. I believe there is an incline. Even John, I think John Lott would tell us, there's been a bit of an incline over the last 15 years, but it's from 12 mass shootings to 15 mass shootings
right.
to You're talking about a very small number overall, and now you're asking, how do we stop this? It starts to get to be a little bit like, how do you stop a super low probability but high impact event? And that's incredibly complicated.
Yeah. And I don't know what the solution is, but I understand why events like what happened in Chicago and on a smaller scale what happened in Philadelphia, they capture the public fear in a way that, to your point, Buck, two guys who get into an argument and are 18 years old and end up shooting at each other, that's a targeted act of violence. You can avoid, in theory, a targeted act of violence that you're not involved in. You can't avoid if some crazy guy decides to start shooting at you from a tall building at a public event like a July 4th parade. We're talking about so many different issues out there, in particular, the gun violence that exploded on July 4th north of Chicago, but also trying to put that in context with the overall amounts of gun violence that happened in Chicago. And Illinois' governor said, people who say today is not the time to talk about gun control, no better day, no better time. Here he is. Listen to this.
If you're angry today, I'm here to tell you, be angry. I'm furious. I'm furious that yet more innocent lives were taken by gun violence. I'm furious that their loved ones are forever broken by what took place today. I'm furious that children and their families have been traumatized. I'm furious that this is happening in communities all across Illinois and America. I'm furious because it does not have to be this way. And yet we as a nation, well, we continue to allow this to happen.
So that's one cut. I want to play the other one where he essentially lets it be known that Second Amendment rights are, in fact, on the table to be taken away by continuing this musket discussion, which I think, maybe I'm wrong on this, Buck, but your idiot governor in New York, Kathy Hochul, also was out with the musket argument.
Clay, there's an important rule, okay? Nothing is too stupid for the governor of New York to say it. Nothing. Just remember that.
You may not have liked Cuomo, but he's not an idiot.
No,
I really feel like
Cuomo's a thug. He's not a moron.
Yes.
Kathy Hochul is a moron.
Kathy Hochul is a moron. Here's J.B. Pritzker arguing about muskets versus guns.
Our founders carried muskets, not assault weapons. And I don't think a single one of them would have said that you have a constitutional right to an assault weapon with a high-capacity magazine.
I think they would have, Buck.
Well, yeah.
leaving
What did he
aside,
think we were shooting
about
at the Redcoats with, by the way? The same weapons they had.
That's right. That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I think they would all say that if the people who were trying to beat you in a war for American independence had high-capacity guns, that you also should have high-capacity guns. But the issue here is, I may have missed it, but I don't think the Democratic governor of Illinois has regularly spoken out about the violence taking place every day in Chicago. I don't think he's been outraged by that gun violence. I certainly haven't seen him losing his cool effectively, as it sounded like he was doing in that discussion. And the question that I believe is really fascinating is, why not? If you truly care about gun violence, and if your goal is to limit it, which I think almost everybody out there listening right now, regardless of their politics, would say, hey, yeah, I wish there were less shootings. Hey, yeah, I wish there were less murders. Why do we only talk about guns when there are mass shootings and not when there's daily shootings?
Well, because, and he got right to this actually at the beginning, that whole be angry. You'll notice he's trying to channel the anger of people who are very, emotional at that moment in time, not just in the community of Highland Park, but all across Illinois, all across the country. And then it transitions to, we allow this to happen. Allow this to happen, he says. No one's allowing this to happen. That is a vicious and stupid lie. What they're trying to say is, people don't care about this who don't agree with my politics. The people who don't want to give up all of their guns are the problem, right? So it's be angry and then channel that anger toward my political opponents. This is the Democrat playbook. This is why mass shooting, a lot of attention. And of course, they're also right away saying, he's a Trump supporter. First of all, I don't even want to get into this. I mean, the kid looks like a far leftist, but who knows? And the point is, he's a psychopath. So why are we all supposed to sit around and pretend to be, amateur Sigmund Freuds here, breaking down some psychoanalysis of this maniac? The guy's clearly out of his mind, clearly a lunatic, and yet they try immediately now. They say, let's politicize this. Let's go with this. Let's push. And then I say, all right, let's have a conversation. Allow this to happen. What would not allow this to happen? And they won't actually they'll say, oh, background check. We have background checks. Oh, other states need to have stricter gun laws. Why is it that the other states with the stricter gun laws don't actually have the same levels of gun violence? They're talking about the red states, of course. Indiana is where all the guns come from. Pennsylvania from New York is where all the guns come from. Why is it that the city of Chicago has worse violence than any city my friend David Harsanyi at National Review made a great data-based argument on this. Look at San Francisco, Clay. Look at Los Angeles. Nevada's next door. You can get a gun in Nevada, no problem. Right? I mean, you have to go through the legal process, but I'm saying it's a gun friendly state, and yet you don't have the same kind of shootings even in California cities you do in Chicago. Chicago is clearly a specific problem.
I really come back to, and maybe this is just because I've got 3 boys myself, and fortunately my boys are still young, 14, 11, and 7, and I know this guy was 22. But where's his family? Same thing happens in Buffalo. These are all young, incredibly troubled boys. Where are the dads? And I mean this on a larger scale. To me, this comes back to dads and absent dads. I asked the question earlier in the show, why are we seeing an outbreak of mass shootings and violence from young, very troubled men? And I put it on dads to a certain extent because I think there are a lot of absent dads, but moms can be involved too. Buck, if you and I can watch a video of this kid, 22 years old, we can talk about what age you want to call somebody a kid, but same thing with the Uvalde shooter, same thing with the Buffalo shooter. If we can look at their social media profiles and in 5 minutes we can say, this kid is mentally unwell, where are the parents? And I say that as a dad of 3, and I know there's a lot of people out there who are dads and moms and grandparents and grandmas, but if we as the general public can look at these kids' social media profiles and immediately diagnose that they're mentally unwell, how absent are these parents that they're not doing something to try to help their mentally unwell child?
I'd be fascinated to hear from someone who deals with, in a clinical practice, deeply, mentally unwell and dangerous, right? There's a huge, 99% of people who have mental health issues, including some pretty serious ones, aren't a threat to anybody. It's just a question of them having a fulfilling, happy, stable life. But when you get into that 1% who are either a danger to themselves or others, and that's, I know, where, psychiatrists have a duty to actually...
The Tarasoff, warnings.
Yes, there are things they actually have to do there. It can't just be, you can't tell people, I'm planning something, horrific, and there's a secrecy around that for mental health reasons. But I would wonder, I think that there might be cases, and I don't know, there might be cases where you have an individual who is just, I don't know what to say, an evil person. I mean, a psychopath, and the parents, and maybe hides it a bit from the parents, because this individual, from what we know, he was posting stuff. Did the parents know about the posts? Did he just seem like a troubled kid? There are a lot of when I say kid, I know he's 22. He looks, honestly, part of it is that he looks like he's 14. About like 14 or 15, which is one of the things that I think a lot of people are processing about this too. But another part of this, Clay, and I always preface this is a hypothesis. I'm not asserting this as true, but I do believe this is arguably true. I think that the pandemic and the way that we were not only locked down, separated, and immiserated, but also the constant fear-mongering and the we're all going to die, I think that it was almost like a forced government panic and nihilism that for people like you, me, our audience, it was annoying, it was oppressive, but, we're going to roll and do what we can do, right? We're going to keep on moving forward. But people who are on that edge, who already were psychologically imbalanced, I think it may have pushed some of them into a place where, the circuitry, the wiring in their brains never really recovered. Again, I'm not a doctor. It's just a hypothesis, but I don't think that's crazy.
I think there are many reasons, and social media and the internet in general have made people who are crazy easier able to connect with other people who are crazy and or encourage them to behave in crazy fashion. I think there's so much going on there. The toxicity feeds on itself.